Good afternoon. Welcome to our webinar. Good morning to those of you who are in the United States. Today we're going to present a webinar on the topic of using MITRE ATT&CK to simulate ransomware techniques. And a little bit, my name is Ronan Lavelle. I'm the founder and CEO of Validato. And Validato is a graduate company of the National Cybersecurity Centre in the UK Cyber Accelerator Program. And our company simulates cyber threat scenarios, like we're going to show today, based on MITRE ATT&CK, in order to test security control effectiveness and detection capabilities. So a little bit of housekeeping. We're going to record the webinar today, and we will send you a copy of that recording within 24 hours. I do encourage you also to ask any questions, and you can submit questions through the Q&A button, which you should find, I think, on the bottom of your screens. Please don't use the chat button because they will be recorded in the screen recording, whereas the Q&A is not. And if it's okay with you, I will address the questions at the end of the session. So maybe to start off, let's maybe picture a common scenario. The board are having a meeting, and one board member raises the topic of a ransomware attack that has recently hit a peer company or a competitor. And they ask the CISO or the security representative whether this kind of effect can happen to their business. Maybe the CISO then, after the meeting, goes to his or her team to request that we urgently need to understand how the company's defenses would stand up to a ransomware attack like that. And with the kind of tool we're going to show you today that looks at MITRE ATT&CK and how we can simulate adversarial behaviors, in pretty short order, we can go back to the board with really clear and unbiased data on the state of resilience of the company's infrastructure and network. And that's really what we're going to talk about today. But before we do that, we need to have a look at some concepts that have either traditionally been held within threat intelligence and incident response teams, but also what we need to do to look at behaviors and predicted future activities in your network. And so we incident response teams have for a long time have looked at the concept of IOCs, or indicators of compromise. And in certain regards, this is like looking in the rearview mirror into activities that have happened and the various stages of an attack as it transpired within an environment. But for the most part, what we're trying to do is not look in the rearview mirror, but look into the future, into what will happen or could happen in your environment. So we're looking at a more proactive approach, and this particular graphic here comes from CrowdStrike, where CrowdStrike and other specialists in the space call these indicators of attack, or indicators of behavior, also some people talk about. And so here we're looking at, is it possible to infiltrate an environment? Can you move laterally? Can you gain privilege? Can you gain command and control? Can you maybe exfiltrate data from the organization? And so we're looking at what are the behaviors in each of these tactical phases. And essentially, this is what we're going to talk about today. But to look at this a slightly different way, David Bianco is from Splunk, and he created a very useful pyramid of pain, where we look at typical IOC-based approaches from pretty easy and up to really hard ways to address and to stop or block these kind of activities. So the bottom of this pyramid, if people create IP addresses or domain names, it's pretty easy to identify those and to block them or take them down in some cases. But then the threat actor is also finding this quite easy, and they can just recreate 20 or 50 of them from different locations the next day, for instance. If you start looking at what the industry and MITRE in particular are calling tactics, techniques, and procedures, or TTPs. These are basically the adversarial behaviors. So it's really, really hard in order to generate or create a brand new unique behavior. Most of them have been documented already, and this is essentially where we're going to focus our presentation on today. So it's how do we simulate in a safe environment the adversarial behaviors, and we're talking today specifically around ransomware. How do we test your controls in a control environment to test your cyber resilience against those? So the MITRE ATT&CK framework, if you're not familiar, is an awesome resource of adversarial behaviors. It's like a constantly updated library of these tactics, techniques, and procedures. And what we do is we have created reusable objects, essentially, from the MITRE ATT&CK kill chain, if you like, but also if you ever go to attack.mitre.org, you can look at the group software and campaign section of the MITRE ATT&CK web resource and understand all of the documented behaviors around threat actors, software as in malware and other tools that have been created, as well as campaigns like ransomware campaigns and extortion campaigns that are used to attack organizations in the public and the private sector. And so in our world, in our Validato world, what this looks like is we basically take MITRE ATT&CK and we allow you to operationalize it. So to immediately execute any threat-based scenario in your environment in a couple of mouse clicks. So what we're looking at here is a representation of, in this case, it's LockBit, ransomware threat actor. And how does that map across the MITRE ATT&CK kill chain? So these are all the tactical areas with all the techniques that are being exploited. And essentially what we're trying to do is to use MITRE ATT&CK and then try and use our methods and our tools to compromise those techniques, which I'll show you very shortly. In fact, I'm going to show you that right now. I'm just going to stop my screen and remind you, if you would like to ask any questions, please feel free to type your questions in the Q&A dialog box. So I'm just going to log into our portal environment. There. So here we have the Validato portal. There are, by the way, other choices and options for you to safely test MITRE ATT&CK techniques in the marketplace. We just happen to be one of those vendors. And here we're looking at a dashboard where we can see our level of overall protection. So we're using MITRE ATT&CK in order to answer or question in two core areas. So one is, do our security controls work? Are they as effective as we hope or think they should be? And secondly, are we able to detect that activity? So are our security controls sending log data to the SIEM? And is your SIEM or your log and event management system configured correctly for your teams or your external service providers, if you use a provider, to be able to see and detect that activity? And this dashboard here shows us over time, when we run different attack simulations, how we have performed and against our level of expectation. But we also call out core critical priority areas of your environment, like your endpoint environment. So we're looking at client-side hosts in particular, and also server-side hosts, mainly because that's where a lot of threat actors are trying to get to and to compromise, but also the ability to move from maybe segment to segment or geographic area, and also to exfiltrate data potentially as well. So when we run our simulations, we provide regular and unbiased data on how our controls are performing in these core areas. And very quickly, it's remarkably simple to run an attack simulation in Validato. And what we're going to show you here is something that only a couple of years ago would have been very complex and very costly to run as a professional services-based engagement. But today I'm going to look at some threat scenarios. So here we have a whole range of different threat scenarios, all based on MITRE. We have created some bundles where, for instance, we have the top MITRE attack techniques from last year. We've got top ransomware techniques. And just this week, the US CISA issued an advisory around a new ransomware group called BianLian. Today, however, we're going to look at general ransomware techniques and see how protected or not we are against those threats. So I can just simply click on Run Scenario, and literally 2 clicks of a mouse button, we can run that safely in our environment. If I click on the box, however, we can go into a little bit more detail and see what we're doing here. So we have some plain text, plain English, I would say, descriptions of what we are looking to simulate and replicate here. And then from a MITRE attack perspective, these are all of the MITRE techniques that we are going to be testing, that MITRE and other organizations recommend that you regularly test and harden your defenses against. And then at the bottom here, we can see what Validato calls our validations. So these are little tests and scripts that we have developed that essentially try and compromise each of these techniques. So these are designed to not cause any damage within an environment, but your security controls should detect them and they should block them. And we're going to tell you if both of those two things don't happen. And if you want to see how this graphically maps across that MITRE kill chain, we can also look at that here as well. Otherwise, to run this test scenario, it is remarkably simple because we've taken all the legwork out of this. So we simply select what we call our validator agent. So in this case, we just have one here, but we could have 5, 10, 15, 20, 100 if you want, dotted around key nodes of the organization. And we can just simply run that. We can also simulate different levels of user privilege. So validator simulations are in kind of 3 different angles, if you like, or 3 veins. One is the threat scenario that we're going to be testing. 2 is the where are we going to test this? So what is the scope? And these are where we put our validator agents. And the third is what level of assumption on user privilege are we going to simulate? So in this particular example, I'm going to simulate a low privilege user in a one area of our business, and we're going to be simulating the top ransomware techniques. And that is literally all I need to do that. That will go off in the background, and without causing any damage or any disruption to business operations, it will go off and it will run those attack simulations. And depending on the size of the scenario that we're running, that will take a few minutes or a couple of hours. But like all good TV cooking programs, here's one that we ran a little bit earlier. So if I go into the top ransomware techniques results page that we ran, I think yesterday, we can see that our overall level of protection is not fantastic, but we saw most of the activities, which is great. But really, we want to see high levels of protection and also high levels of detection. And we can look at the tactical areas within MITRE to see where we're doing well, but also where we have some work to do to harden our defenses. You can also use these tactical areas to prioritize where to do your work first. So you might say, it's really critical that we restrict the ability to gain privilege. So let's make sure that all of the techniques where you can exploit privilege escalation are locked down and hardened for those users that should not be able to do that. And equally, the ability to move laterally or gain command and control or exfiltrate data, you can basically look at whatever particular area of interest that you want to look at first. So in this case, I'm just going to look at this technique here. This is to do with scheduled tasks, and it's the MITRE technique T1053005. And if that means nothing to you, we have extracted all of the plain descriptors from MITRE into the platform, so you can understand exactly what's going on here. What did we do? So here we're testing one technique, but as you can see, we use multiple Validato validations. So these are our little tests and scripts that we're using to try and compromise that technique. And as you can see, we didn't do too well with our security controls in this example. So our controls did not block the vast majority of our validations here. So you can go through these and use our advice around how to mitigate and fix some of these issues. You can also, if necessary, suppress a finding. So if there's a real valid reason why you do not want to block that type of activity, maybe, for instance, it's the use of PowerShell within IT to update resources and services. Then in certain situations, you might want to suppress that finding, which basically has the same effect as ignoring it, or basically making your results look better, even though they're not. However, you can, or an auditor can also look at the suppression list to see where you suppressed your findings and what exceptions you've made. But otherwise, we would recommend fix the issue at source so that you do get that block status. And at the top right here, we can look at our protection status, which is what we're looking at here. But we can also look at our detection status. And here we're doing obviously a lot better. And the way that we're getting detection data through Validato here is to look at your log and event management system. So if that's a SIEM or a managed service that you are using from an external provider, we connect to that environment and get your data that way. But we ultimately want to get detected in all and protects in all categories. So again, you can either suppress the finding, but we also do provide useful information to help IT and information security to configure security controls and core Windows environments in particular to be able to create policies and new rules so that you can detect that activity when you rerun the simulation. And then lastly, if you ever needed to run attack simulations in order to use this for risk assurance purposes and map it back to control frameworks, we've already done some top-level mapping within Validato. So we're mapping to MITRE Defend, which is the opposite framework, if you like, to attack as the defensive framework to help blue teams to defend better. But we also map to the NIST cybersecurity framework, the NIST 853 framework, and ISO 27001. And shortly, we'll also be mapping to the UK cyber assessment framework as well, the CAF framework. So that is a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the Validato platform. It's not intended to be a deep product demonstration. It's more so that you can understand how it is really easy to look at MITRE attack-based threat scenarios and to run those threat scenarios really quickly within a couple of minutes in these kind of environments. So I'm going to stop my screen share here. I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint, if that's all right. And I'll take this opportunity and ask if there are any questions that you might have. And please do feel free to use the Q&A dialog box in the bottom of your screen. Okay, I'm just going to reshare that screen. Okay. Okay, there's a question here. So can you run all of the attacks and have a view on the MITRE ATT&CK framework as a report. So I think that is a question relating to, can you run all MITRE ATT&CK techniques? So to quickly answer that question, we did have that feature and we disabled it because the answers are overwhelming. So we have the ability to run all MITRE techniques and to see in one view how your defenses stand up against them. But we would strongly recommend that you do a hop, skip, jump approach to that type of test. And we already have some recommended threat scenarios that we suggest that you do first, taking a sort of risk-based priority approach. And we work up to that. And the only reason it's not a Validato restriction, it's more an empathy thing on your side, because it would create a lot of work potentially. So we would rather you you looked at, say, the most common attack methods in the last 12 months, for instance, or in your industry, run those, see how you are faring, and if you're doing well, then work yourself up to those kind of threat scenarios. And the next question, or maybe a follow-on question, is, would it not give you a holistic view of where your weaknesses are? And yes, absolutely, it would do. It's a short answer. It's more of a question of how long is that to-do list to fix those issues. But yeah, I take your point. You can run an all techniques attack simulation and see that view, but it might be a bit of a depressing view, is what we're trying to say. So if you would like to use that data and report to your board, for instance, maybe it's best to get some green rather than red everywhere first, by fixing high priority issues first, is what we would recommend. Before I just answer the next question, I will send a copy of this presentation to everyone at the end of the presentation. We did write a blog just yesterday about this new emerging ransomware threat group called BianLian. Apparently, it is the theatrical mask-wearing dance. That's what BianLian is. But it's a very comprehensive ransomware threat actor. And you are able to now simulate those behaviors within the Validato platform as well. Okay, so please do keep the questions coming. And we have, yeah, actually, it's a very interesting question here. It would be interesting to see some statistics about how companies are doing across different critical sectors. So hold that thought, person who asked that question. So we will probably be creating anonymized analytics on those kind of things. So not sharing any specifics to do with any individual customers, but within the Validato platform, we will probably share insights on, for instance, the most popular threat scenarios to simulate, the biggest threats in different industries or sectors, and other things that our customers and the community would like to share with other customers. I hope that answers that question. We have one also here, which is what does Validato require to run? So actually very little is the short answer. It's actually a SaaS-based platform, and I do have an architecture slide here somewhere. So this will be in the presentation deck that I'll send over to you. But it is a cloud-based console. The console is created for each individual customer, and then the only on-premise components are what we call our validator agents. So these are lightweight .NET applications or applets, and they are installed on key nodes within an environment. So typically within endpoints, so servers and desktop environments, but critically not on every device. You need to put them on one image within, say, a gold image, for instance. But if you want to test things like lateral movement, there would need to be at least one validator agent in each network segment or part of your organization. So that's a quick architectural visit. I have a question here about how much does Validato cost? In all honesty, we have a flexible price list that is dependent on, one is the size of your organization. So if you're a small organization, we're not going to charge you a big company's fee, whereas if you're a larger organization, you may well be able to afford slightly more than a smaller one, but also the size of your Validato deployment. But our prices start remarkably from about $5,000 and upwards. When you compare this with some of the alternatives, either professional services kind of solutions or other automation solutions that can cost in the six figures and above, it's fairly good value for money in some regards. And I have one more question here, which relates to MITRE ATT&CK technique coverage. Actually, it's a really good question. It's like, are all of the MITRE ATT&CK techniques covered in Validato? And the answer is yes, they are, but there are some techniques that we exclude, either because we have deprioritized them because we believe there are more important validation tests that we're developing that we need to get to first. So there's a small subset of techniques that we call, we have in pending status, and there's a smaller subset of those that we would define as out of scope. So out of scope MITRE techniques might be, if you're familiar with the framework, and if you're not, just go to attack.mitre.org, but any of the techniques that relate to physical activities, like putting a USB stick in a device, for instance, is not something that we can digitally simulate, or any human-based action. So we don't simulate those kind of techniques. And we would advise that if those are important for you, that you would use Validato in conjunction with other methods to test those techniques that are out of scope. Okay, so it's just coming up to the half-hour mark. I have no more questions on my screen. Actually, sorry, I do. As an attacker, I would look to pwn Validato and use it to move laterally within a target network. Do you have a bug bounty program to ensure this is difficult to achieve? So the person that asked that question, we are very aware of a potential desire to exploit our environment to attack our customers or other companies. We have put countermeasures in place to restrict and stop that, and we're very happy to go further on that on a one-to-one call. And if you want really a lot of detail on that, we can put an NDA in place together and show you what we've done to restrict those kind of activities. And lastly, sorry, the questions do keep coming in. So what SIEM products are currently supported and on the roadmap? So it's probably quicker or easier to answer the roadmap stuff, because pretty much every major production SIEM is on our roadmap. And full disclosure, we do accelerate and focus our integration attention on what seems to integrate based on our customer projects and usage. But those that we work with already would be things like Microsoft Sentinel environments. We're working with Alert Logic. We have a whole range, whether it's Logarithm, Splunk, ArcSight, QRadar, all these different environments. But again, if you want more further details on that, we can provide that on a one-to-one as well. Super. I think at this time, there's no further questions. So if you would like to find out more, we'll be very happy to show you. And you can just contact us at sales@validato.io, or our website is validato.io as well. You can also request a free trial of the platform in on the website, but also we can show you a deep dive as well on a one-to-one call. It just remains for me to say thank you very much for your time today, and I hope that was a useful 30 minutes of your time. And again, we thank you, and hopefully we'll speak more in the future. Thank you very much, and goodbye.